What's up, HyperFast Nation? On this episode of the HyperFast Wealth Show, we've got an amazing guest. He started off building a single family home portfolio as a side business, then has moved into bigger multifamily deals and syndications. Now he's got a portfolio that he's involved in of, I think, over 4,000 homes. I mean, it's a big number, 4,000 doors. He's teaching other people how to do it. Welcome to the HyperFast Wealth Show, Lane Kawaoka. All right, welcome to the show, Lane. How are you doing today?
Hey, thanks for having me, Dan. Aloha, everybody.
Yeah, I'm excited, and by the way, I like that background you got going on there. All those different pictures. You got the simplepassivecashflow.com. Pretty cool.
Thanks. Gotta make it look like I have friends, right? No one wants to work with people with no friends.
Well, I'm sure you got lots of friends, and as I said in the intro, you got lots of houses too. So why don't you give our listeners today a little bit of a background on who you to where you are now with I think it was 11 cash flowing assets, homes.
Yeah, so currently today I own 4,500 rental properties, mostly apartments these days that we buy.
Okay.
A couple hundred or bigger, so we're kind of buying them in clumps. But didn't always start out with that. I started investing back in 2009 with a single family home in Seattle. This is all while I was working the engineering day job. I was kind of one of these guys, I call it a linear path, right? Our parents taught us to go to school, study hard, work this job for 40, 50 years, buy a house to live in. So that's what I did, right? I was like a good little boy. And I just started renting it out, $2,200 a month. And the mortgage was $1,600, and that's where it all started. I was like, wow, I like this cash flow thing.
So that was your first home, and then now you said a couple thousand units, huh?
Yeah. I mean, it's just vanity metrics, to be honest, right?
Yeah.
But, how can we help out? Let's talk today how we can kind of get people going. And for a lot of people, they don't even have one or a few rentals yet.
Yeah, so for the real estate agent out there or the investor starting out, what would you tell them? What's the best way to get started out? Like they're not going to go out and buy 100-unit building, most likely. Maybe they could be like an investor in it or something like that. But how do they start out if they want to do it themselves and start getting cash flow on real estate assets that they own and control?
Yeah, so the first thing is buying in the right places. So I am not a big fan of buying in primary markets like California, Seattle, Hawaii, New York, Boston. I kind of stick to places where we can get the 1% rent to value ratio, not in war zone type of areas. For those of you guys who don't know, rent to value ratio is you take the month rent divided by purchase price. That's what you're looking for is 1% or higher. So for a lot of folks like myself, if we live on the West Coast, it's just not going to be able to get access to these types of properties. So we have to go to places like Birmingham, Atlanta, Indianapolis, Kansas City, Little Rock, Memphis. So that's what I kind of did for my first half of my investing career. Around 2015, I had 11 rentals in Birmingham, Atlanta, Indianapolis, and Pennsylvania. And it's no tricks, no games here. I mean, I had a good paying job, and for people listening, you got to make money first. You need that 20% down payment. I mean, that's the hardest part of this.
And were you starting off with single families in all of these different markets, or were you going, multi, or how obviously you identified some places that met that 1% criteria, right? So that meant if you spend $100,000 on the property, you were getting $1,000 in monthly rent minimum. But what did that look like? Was it single families or what was the mix?
Yeah, I had a duplex in there, but for the most part, single family homes, because although, duplexes, triplexes, or quads, they seem to cash flow better on paper, but the resale value on the single family homes, as you parlay into bigger deals, syndications, and private placements later, it's way better on single family homes, right? Because you can sell it, as we all know, to an emotional buyer, whereas a duplex, triplex, or quad or something bigger, you're selling it to another cheapskate investor. So that's kind of you got to have that end game in mind where you're selling that asset eventually.
How did you manage, or before we get to that, even how did you find the deals and how did you manage them, being that they weren't in your backyard, they weren't in your geographic area? A lot of people, I think, struggle with that concept of it's not where I am, every day or close by. How do I find it? How do I manage it? How do I know if it's a good deal? All that good stuff.
Yeah, so I started with this thing called like a turnkey rental. I think you can Google it out there. There's a lot of different definitions of this term, but basically a rehabber will go in, they'll buy a piece of junk property, fix it up with brand new, major components like the new roof, new appliances, new flooring, plumbing, electrical, and they'll kind of make it more rent ready as opposed to, it won't have granite countertops, it won't be in the best school districts, but it'll be good rental stock for a good class B or maybe low class B tenant. And you as the end buyer can buy this thing as a turnkey rental. And sometimes they'll even put in the tenant there for you. So it's truly turnkey, or I call it, turnkey rentals, kind of like tricycle, right? Like, training wheels. But yeah, I initially started out with that a little bit and then, figured out what the heck was happening. And I built relationships with property managers. And that's the key, is the property managers that are kind of help you to, verify what the rents on these properties remotely. And, most of us, we don't visit the properties. That's not really practical, right? Because our highest and best use is either at our day jobs, or for a lot of you guys, selling houses, turning and burning at your active stuff.
Yeah, so I think, our real estate team is based in Washington, D.C. area. We've got a lot of agents that follow us there, a lot that follows from California too. So a lot of them anyway are in, high price markets. And those are great for appreciation. Those are great for obviously commission checks. Not as great probably for meeting this 1% rule. It's probably more like a 0.5% in, in some of these places.
I mean, that's the arbitrage you got to play, right? I mean, people make a lot of good money in these high price areas, but take the money and arbitrage it somewhere else where you're getting better rent to value ratio or cash flow.
Yeah. So if you were starting out, if you could go, put yourself back to where you were 10 years ago and you had 50 grand, 100 grand, whatever to invest, what city, what area would you go into right now?
I mean, like I said from that list, Birmingham, Atlanta, Indianapolis, Kansas City, Memphis, Little Rock, you really can't go wrong, right? At that point, it's more who do you work with and trust, right? I mean, you can work with a marketer who basically just, pumps up the value of the property. And I kind of talk about this in the first, 6 podcasts, because that's what I used to do back then personally. But yeah, that's the start. If you're just starting out and your net worth is under $250,000, pick up some single family homes. That's what I did for my first 5-6 years. But if you're more, you're more of an accredited investor, your net worth is higher than, I would say, $500,000, maybe you can skip right over the rental property shindig and go right to private placements and syndications. But it depends where you are.
Yeah, let's talk about that. So obviously the agent just starting out, a little bit of down payment money, go find that single family home in one of these markets, right? What if you're a successful agent making a couple $100,000 a year in commissions? Maybe you've got over $1 million of investable assets. Maybe you already own a couple single families as well. Where should they be looking today? Should they be looking at syndications? Should they be looking to do their own multifamily? What would your advice be to that person?
Well, it ultimately comes down to what's your highest and best use, right? I mean, if you're a successful agent, you're probably pretty decent at business and entrepreneurship. But ultimately, you got to figure out what your highest and best use is. For a lot of my clients, I got a lot of doctors, lawyers, successful business guys. Their business of what they do is going to, kind of takes precedence, and as opposed to rebooting themselves as a multifamily operator. So you got to take that into account. I mean, there's a myriad of guys who'll take your 30 grand and train you, and you might have a 5% success rate. But for a lot of the guys over 1.5 million, you might be already pretty dang close to endgame. Why reboot? Just keep selling houses. If you're doing what you're doing, you get there maybe in the next few years. But kind of going back to like my story, like I had 11 rentals in 2015. I had a few $100 of cash flow per property, not including the mortgage pay down, the tax benefits, and the property appreciation. That's pretty good, right? I mean, who doesn't want a few $100 and 11 rentals? That's like, a few grand per month, but that's not enough, right? I don't know what American family can survive, especially in the East Coast or California, on 3 grand a month. So for people who don't own a bunch of rentals, just to give you a little picture, again, I had professional property management to deal with all my headaches. But with 11 rentals, we had maybe an eviction or 2 a year, some kind of big catastrophe, like a tree falling on the house, or some kind of winter or hurricane storm, affecting the property maybe like once every quarter for 11 rentals, big, which is totally manageable, right? But if you want 10 grand of passive income, you're going to multiply that number by 3. So now you're talking about eviction every other month, and some kind of big catastrophe every other week. And as you can see, it becomes very unscalable. And as your properties appreciate, the name of the game is not paying down your properties. Who wants to do that? That's old school, right? That doesn't work. You need to always be moving your equity into the next asset, right? Monitoring your return on equity. And with 11, 30 rentals, that's impractical. You'll just make your lender buddy rich doing that type of stuff with friction costs and origination fees. So this is where I started to join different masterminds and get around higher net worth investors. And all they were doing was investing in private placements and syndications. And they all, kind of laughed at the days when they were buying little dinky single family homes.
So did you go down that path? Did you start getting involved in syndications and private placements?
Yeah, it took me about 1.5 years to kind of wrap my head around it, because it's the whole thing like, well, I'm doing this, it's working, I know how to buy them, I know who to work with, I got my property management team, I know how to do it. But like to kind of switch and pivot takes a little bit, right? Like if you got a good forearm in tennis, trying the backhand is hard, right? Why do it if you're kicking everyone's butt? So it's kind of one of those deals. But yeah, I eventually started to go into syndications and private placements as my network grew in that area. And it truly is a very big reboot. You're not talking to, contractors, flippers, wholesalers. All the cast of characters you did in your first half of your life are totally non-existent in the other one. When you're a syndication accredited investor, the name of the game is finding good sponsors to work with and other pure passive accredited investors. And quite frankly, a lot of these guys aren't at your local RIA or on free online forums, right? That's not where rich people, accredited, sophisticated investors hang out.
So so you were going into these deals as a limited partner then, correct?
Yeah, at first I was just, LP, wanted to see how it is from the inside. But, because my podcast was so popular, a lot of people just kind of wanted to follow me, like whale watch. So that's when I kind of got more involved in the operations side. And today, 4,500 units, I think over 30 deals we've done. A bunch of them have gone full cycle now. But yeah, just, trying to pick up good stabilized assets with good Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac debt that are cash flowing day one, and a little bit of value add, $4,000 to $6,000 a unit, changing out the flooring, new appliances. Just getting that $100, $150 rent bump is kind of the business plan.
And are you putting the deals together and helping, with the syndication and all that stuff now?
Yeah. Typically it's me and just one other guy. I'm not on the acquisition side. I don't interact very well with brokers. So typically my partner does that, and then kind of tag team on bringing in investors and then operating it once we get there into the deal. We use third-party property management, but our role as asset managers, kind of steering the ship.
What markets are you looking in now for the assets that you're?
Yeah, so just like when you're buying single-family homes, it's all the red states. right? Not to say anything politically, but I want to invest in places where I have the laws on my side as the landlord. Next, red states typically are a little bit economic growth focused, and most times, the general population trend is moving towards the south or the Sun Belt. So the states that I personally target are like Arizona, Texas, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi. A few other ones out there I think that are good are like the Carolinas and Florida. I think out of those 6 states, those 6 states are going to probably kick the butt of the rest of the nation any day of the week.
Yeah, I know a lot of people that are in the multifamily space that are pretty much only in the Southeast or maybe over into Arizona, but that it seems to be, going to where there's low taxes, good laws, and good weather.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. You either look at the population growth or like employer growth. Those are two indicators. But I think what really is the data indicator is just pure rent growth per year, which is very trackable. That's just one metric that you can very quickly just look up and see where everybody's moving to.
Do you still own the original single family homes, by the way?
I sold a lot of them off in 2018. I didn't pay any taxes on that because in these larger syndication deals, you do cost segregation. So you get this huge glut of passive activity losses, which I use to offset the capital gain and depreciation recapture. So I don't know why anybody does 1031 exchanges. To me, they're totally obsolete with current bonus depreciation laws.
Yeah, that's a good point. And the other point too, just to make for real estate agents listening, is most real estate agents are able to really benefit from cost seg because for accounting purposes, they're actually labeled as, a real estate professional.
Yeah,
so they can actually get their active income written off if they buy big enough, rental assets.
Yeah, it's a little tricky, right? Like you can't sell houses and now use your passive activity losses to offset your ordinary income. You're going to also need 750 hours of active participation in your portfolio. But yeah, I work with a lot of my clients to kind of work that picture with them so that they can get a game plan, so that they can go into the CPA's office and have that guy check the box for them. I mean, you guys need to be empowered to figure out how to do this on your own. It's not a strategy. It's not a discussion between you and your CPA. That's for sure. Most CPAs are pretty clueless on this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, their role is to kind of, I always say you go meet people like you or learn at conferences or events, and then like bring the ideas back to your CPA and just make sure you're doing it in a way that's going to keep you out of trouble. But there's certainly, most of them anyway, aren't going to bring you the good tax saving strategies from what I've seen.
Right. I mean, it makes no sense, right? When I was an engineer, I always did it the easiest way. So, I don't blame them. I mean, but then again, that's why they still have a JOB, right? They don't really do this stuff.
Yeah, well, this has been great. I love your story. I love what you've been doing with passive income. I know you've got to run soon. Before we wrap up, though, I always love doing the HyperFast round. If you're ready for some rapid fire questions.
Yeah, here we go, man.
All right. What's your biggest piece of advice to a new real estate investor?
Focus on cash flow. Most people focus on buying low, sell high appreciation. To me, that easy come, easy go. Now, granted, it's real estate, so the damn thing typically goes up. But, prudent cash flow, I think, is the sound way to build wealth. At least that's how I did it.
All right. What would you tell an experienced real estate investor?
Your network is your net worth. Make sure you have the right people around you. And finding other accredited investors is probably one of the most difficult things out there because they're not at the local RIA. They're not trolling some free internet forum. They're not at some happy hour with a bunch of bros, right? People who are accredited have busy lives. They have a family, but you got to strive to find that type of community.
Yeah, that's certainly true. What's the biggest challenge you've ever had in your business, and how did you overcome it?
I think the frustrating thing with my strategy just takes a while, right? Cash flow is slow. It's not it's not like appreciation where you can go, your money grows 10 to 20% a year. Granted, we're doing forced appreciation these days, so it's a little bit different. But when I was starting out, it's really slow and just but it's a not get rich quick thing, this cash flow stuff, but it's a get rich surely thing.
All right. What are you most excited about investing wise in 2021?
We went through a freaking pandemic last year, and cap rates for multifamily assets stayed the same. Kind of went up a little bit. We collected 97% of the rents normally. It didn't really drop, and that's why we're investing in workforce housing. I mean, what happens when some of these, like Fannie Mae's estimated GDP growth 5% this next quarter and 7% Q3, Q4? I mean, shoot, if now's not all the signal to like get in now, you guys need to wake up because you're probably going to miss one of the biggest bull markets we've ever seen. If you didn't already miss 2012 and 2016.
Yeah, especially when inflation eventually kicks in. So I agree with you 100%. Last question. Where do you see yourself 5 years from now?
I don't know, just probably doing the same thing, picking up, some cash flowing assets with a little bit of value add and keep on rolling. And maybe I'll have some different hobbies by then. Maybe I might learn how to surf or something, or I'll probably just get one of those electric surfboards so I don't have to learn.
Yeah, those are pretty cool. I love seeing those. Well, it's been great. You've had a lot to offer on how to build up cash flow assets, whether you're a beginner, whether you're, you know, veteran or anywhere in between. So I appreciate that. If people want to get in touch with you, learn more about what you do, invest in what you're doing, any of that good stuff, what are the best ways for them to do that?
Yeah, they can go to my website, simplepassivecashflow.com. I got my podcast on iTunes and Google Play, Simple Passive Cashflow, Passive um, Income, I think it's called. But yeah, email address, lane@simplepassivecashflow.com.
All right, simplepassivecashflow.com. That's the place to go to connect with Lane. Once again, thank you for being on the show, and to all our listeners and viewers out there, thank you. We'll see you next time.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the HyperFast Show. Subscribe to us if you want to make sure you get the latest and greatest HyperFast shows. And remember, we love reviews. Reviews help us bring better and better guests and improve our shows. So give us the good, the bad, and the ugly. We hope you enjoyed the show, and we will see you next time.
Hey guys, thanks for sticking around to the end. I hope you enjoyed that video, and if you want to see more, click right here. And if you want 100 real estate tips from my best-selling book, click right here to download them instantly. And if you're new to this channel, click below to subscribe and turn on post notifications so you don't miss out. And leave some comments about what you think on the videos.